So hi everyone, my name is Mofe Salami. I'm a developer advocate at Yapily, and today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the challenges that we're solving as an open banking gateway that's integrating across UK, Ireland, and Europe. So today this talk is going to be mainly focused on our main microservice, which is the Yapily API. But we do have a range of different microservices, both front end and back end. And so for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to focus on our Java microservice, Java Spring microservice. Our stack is built on the Duke Cloud. So we use GKE to deploy our services as containers, using Helm as a deployment mechanism, which is of course built into our build pipelines. But then for the Java API, we have a Swagger specification that allows us to build Java, Python, and Node SDKs, which will be versioned across every time we do a release. We do multiple releases a week using, of course, the agile methodologies, but we don't actually have a versioned API. So one of the approaches that we took from the start was to have a backwards compatible API. And this is going to be a really interesting problem, or a really interesting thing to bear in mind when we start speaking about some of the challenges. For those of you who are not familiar with open banking, it basically gives you the ability as a third-party provider to communicate with a bank via their open APIs for open banking. And it gives you the ability to access users' account information and to initiate a payment on their behalf just by actually going through the OAuth 2 flow and requesting consent from the bank. And so these screenshots that you see here are something that a third party, such as Waldo in this example, would actually use and build. And then they'll use the API request that you see at the top. So get institutions, post create account authorization, and get accounts to actually access that information. So some of the things that Yapily provide. So in the second screenshot here, we give you a list of all the different names that the bank may use. So the short names, the full names, as well as icons, and various other information that will allow the developer to build the application that they want. You then have to show the mandated requirements and the consent screen to show the customer exactly what you're requesting for them. And then once the user confirms that they're happy to share this information or initiate this particular payment, Yapily will actually provide a means for you to generate an auth URL to send your user to via redirect, which will redirect them to the bank. And that could be on the web, or that can be on the mobile app if you're using online banking on your phone. And then the user will be able to see the exact same request within the bank and authorize it. Providing they do that, then you'll be issued the bank will issue a token to Yapily, and Yapily will take care of exchanging that and abstracting that for you as a consent token, which you can then use to get accounts, transactions, and any other use case that your application may you may desire to do. And so you can use that link at the bottom there to see a more detailed overview of some of the examples that we have, along with the various different requests and at what stage you want to do that. So without further ado, let's start looking at some of the challenges that we're actually addressing. So from the inception of the company in 2017, one of the big things we wanted to do is come into the open banking space and really provide a unified way of communicating with each of the banks. So that will be in the request and the response, the request to the bank and the response you get back from the bank. So as you can see on the screen here, on the left, we have everything you would have had to do for every single bank if you want to connect to them. And this is an example taken from when you want to create an account authorization. And this is actually one of two requests that you actually have to send on behalf of Monzo. So of course, you have to learn all the various different headers that you need to provide, as well as the URL for the bank as well, and for the particular endpoint. And of course, over time, you also have to take on that maintenance work to keep up to date with the banks. And obviously, if you're doing this for every single bank and you're looking to onboard across many different countries, that might be a lot to actually do. And so what we provide is an abstraction that hides all of this complex, all the security, all of that from the customer. And all you have to supply is an institution ID and the user who is actually requesting, or whose information you're either requesting or initiating a payment on behalf of. So great, problem solved, right? Well, we found that this worked quite well initially, but as we began to increase our coverage across Europe, and as we began to onboard more and more customers, we actually found that the functionality provided by each of the banks will be quite different. And that's kind of to do with where open banking is today, in the sense that there's a lot of space for optional pieces of functionality that is up to the bank whether they want to provide or not. And so we had to kind of tackle how we wanted to support that and of course make that available to our customers. So a very simple way we did this was by breaking down all the different things you can do with a bank, such as getting the account information into what we call a feature. And all this would be just a description of what you can do and can't do with a bank. And this, of course, allowed us to go on a bank by bank case and tell you exactly what you can and can't do with a bank. And we provided this information in our Get Institutions endpoint, which you saw in that those series of screenshots of the mobile application. And we found that this was actually quite useful for actually managing change to an existing bank. So with the example of when a particular feature from a particular bank was found to be unhealthy, maybe it was down, or maybe not working as intended, this gave us the flexibility to turn off that particular feature behind the scenes and not expose that to our customers. And this would be a change that we can do without actually breaking any of the features or any of the functionality within the API. So that was quite nice. It also meant it gave us the flexibility to actually be able to turn on those features or make those features available just by providing these flags as the banks actually mature and continue to support newer features that weren't currently supported. And again, doing that without actually breaking any of existing banks' behavior or existing customers' behavior. So amazing, right? It's a great solution. This works and solves 2 of our problems already. Well, actually, we do have this kind of other problem that we now have to onboard and think about when we actually add a new feature that Yapily hasn't already tracked or kept a record of in its list of supported features. A good use case of this is what happens when we integrate a bank and it actually doesn't fit in with any of the other features that we currently have supported. How do we actually cater for that? And actually, when you begin to think about this a bit more, we realize we may actually have a deeper problem here. And sometimes we're in a position where we have to include a new feature that is not currently employed or not currently implemented within the Yapily API that may actually cause a break-in change to the API. Because as I mentioned, Yapily is a backwards compatible API, but the client code and the client SDKs are versioned. And so for statically typed languages like Java or C#, for any customer who is reading these list of enums, these features that are supported, if they see a new enum, that will actually break their code. And how do we manage that and the fact that sometimes we need to include a new, or sometimes we need to be mindful of some of the customers' release cycles. For example, customer that we actually have, or one of the customers we actually have, can only release every 6 months, but there might be a feature that is breaking if we don't bring it in. And so a lot of these problems are really because of open banking and because of it's a new space and because depending on where you are situated in the world, the specifications are actually implemented quite differently. So within the UK, it's quite good. It's quite consistent across a lot of the banks. But within Europe, however, a lot of the banks have a lot of flexibility to interpret the bank behavior slightly differently, and interpret the way the bank should behave in different ways. And so this is a big problem that we are in the process of solving. And one of the ideas we've had would be to change the way in which we expose these features to the customers. But it is a big and global change because it affects every single customer and every single bank. So one of the ways we've solved this in the short term is by actually keeping a track of all the different changes that we're making and working with customers on a one-to-one basis in terms of the change that we're making, and just checking and aiding them through how to upgrade and the changes to make and when those are coming. And so a big change and a big example of this was when we had the two account features here. So get accounts and accounts. And in the UK, that actually provides you access to a user's balances as well. However, we found that within the CBI-Globe gateway, so a lot of the banks in Europe, which are connected through this another gateway, they actually split balances and accounts. And so account and accounts was no longer an effective way of describing or was not a consistent way of describing the information that you get back from the API. And so we had to include two new features, account without balance and account balances to get those balances. So moving on to the penultimate challenge, how do we actually handle different bank behavior? So this is no longer focusing on what feature is provided, but the same data, how is that actually treated by the bank? And a good example of this is actually when making payments and the reference that you can use. And so we found that with particular banks within the UK, the reference has to be less than 18 characters. And if it's not, the payment will actually fail. With other banks, and we've actually seen this with, for example, Monzo, the reference will actually be truncated at 18 characters. So if the user specifies a reference longer, that will be cut short and the payment will actually go through. And then with other banks, and we've seen this mostly within Europe, the reference can be more than 18 characters, and that will be the reference seen on the transaction as well. And so now, based on all of this information, what should be the default documentation for this reference property? And this is just one small example of a problem that we have to solve quite a lot within open banking and within Yapily. For this particular problem, we've just decided to tackle the lowest common denominator, and that would be just to say document, and that will be just the document that we only support or we advise that customers should only use a reference less than 18 characters or less than or equal to 18 characters. And this is mainly to prevent a lot of if-else cases, and as many customers will be using banks across many regions, and so one solution for all is a much better fit. But one other thing that we noticed that was actually a lot more important was actually the way we handled our errors. And so this first screenshot that we see here on the top was how we displayed our errors a few months ago. And we would just return a generic error code of 424 and a failed dependency, and we'll give a tracing ID, which they could raise with support in order to find out more information. Well, all support would be doing would be checking the logs and seeing the exact same error message that we see in that second screenshot. And so because, of course, we're a startup and we want to scale and we want to build on more customers, we just had to provide this information to our customers to make sure that we weren't hammering the support department. And so this is a big change that we thought was really useful for addressing these types of problems. In a similar kind of vein, we also provide an optional feature on all of our endpoints to expose the raw request such that customers can see exactly what we're sending to the banks and get more information when things do go wrong. And then also they can see how Yapily is normalizing a lot of the requests and the responses that they get back from the bank and have complete transparency to see what Yapily is and isn't doing. So my very final challenge is how do we actually manage bank downtime? And this is a really crucial problem to solve as obviously as an API gateway, if a particular bank is down, that will cause errors with the Yapily API, and customers will be angry at us if they're not aware that actually the problem's with the bank. So internally, one of the ways we did this was actually by looking at the bank's downtime and pulling in that data into Slack, and so we'll be notified when there's actually big issues. Similarly, we also built a dedicated monitoring solution that we actually provided for OBIE, so that's the Open Banking Implementation Entity, but then also we've now made that available to our customers, and so they can see key information and the historical data of when things were down, and also get live information of our bots pinging or each of these endpoints to see if there are current issues, and then also pulling information to see, again, the planned events from the banks. Another kind of solution, another kind of initiative that we had quite recently was actually an API score, which was our ranking of the banks, as a way of motivating them to actually improve their integrations and incentivizing them to do that. And we've actually had a couple banks actually reach out to us and say, hey, how do we go higher on this score? But I would say the most important thing that we've done, which our customers really benefit from, is actually exposing the monitoring data direct through the API. And this gives the customer the ability to see and to programmatically build in flows to actually show banks that are only healthy or not support features that are broken with the banks. And then also being able to toggle off different banks based on whether they're healthy or not as well. And so this has been a real good solution to actually tackle this. So that's my talk. Some of the key takeaways I'll say is definitely think about the data structures. If we had to do this all again, if we had known the state of how the banks were implementing a lot of these regulation, then we wouldn't have chosen to use enums in the same way. Another big part would be to enable developers to self-help where possible. So this is through providing examples, providing those error messages, and giving monitoring ability to see the raw request. Just free up the developer to help themselves as much as possible. And this is critical as a startup to actually scale, as we're not going to have all the time in the world to deal with every single request that a customer could, or every single error that a customer could encounter. And then finally, as I've shown in that second or third slide, would be to use working examples over documentation. And one nice kind of example of this was actually how we used to onboard customers. We used to do Postman demos to show how to implement each of the endpoints. But what we actually found that was a bit more effective was having a mix between interactive documentation. So this is screenshots of what the customer's application will actually look like, along with the different endpoints that they can call. And we found that that really helps, especially when working in a space like Open Bank, which is quite new and not everybody understands. With that said, that's my talk. We are hiring, and to see the open positions, please check out the link. Any questions, please feel free to reach out.